Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I know that
Hi.
things are. Oh, sorry. Oh, we're in a different setting. We're in the sanctuary. We're on the stage of the church. And we are with our pastor. Because this month, or for the next few weeks, we are going to be talking about the family. So, June, I believe, is Family Health Month. I'll double check that. We're gonna.
Don't look at me for help on that.
June is basically it's a family themed month. When we looked at a calendar, I'll get the official title. I'll have Kevin put it in there.
Yay, more work.
So this month we're focusing on the aspects of familyhood. Right, we're going to be talking about singleness. We're going to be talking about courtship or getting into courtship. We're going to be talking about marriage and then family and children.
Okay.
Over the next 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Not all in this one. That'll be a lot. I know I don't have much experience with the marriage aspect of things. So
You don't?
I don't. I really shocking. I know. But we'll still get into it. I feel like at this point you would have a wealth of knowledge to share with us.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
So for this episode, we're going to be talking about singleness, which I have a lot to experience
There
with.
you go.
That
So
one I
there you
have
go.
plenty of experience
So
with.
you can school us all here.
I want to apologize to everyone's ears for the way I just cackled into this microphone.
Okay, so in Paul's teachings, he kind of emphasizes the gifts or the pros of singleness. He says that it is a gift, and I know a lot of times people will say that as you are single, that is the time that you can kind of take to focus on your relationship with God and to build upon that. I would ask if you would agree with that, but I feel like the answer would probably be yes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's an old saying that says youth is wasted on youth. And that's one of the problems of youth. But when you examine Paul's teaching, I think a lot of people misunderstand Paul's teaching, particularly in regard to singleness, because I think the way the church or most churches have treated single people is like a kind of a second-class set of people in relation to marriage. So, in the church, you want to, everybody focuses on getting married, and you want people to get married. And but when Paul taught about singleness, what he said is that, look, both states are equally good and important, that one is not better than the other. So he's saying that if you're single, enjoy that period. If you're married, enjoy that.
So, and you might second this, but growing up in the church, there's always been a very strong focus on marriage, right? Especially for young people.
Right.
Right? Like, you kind of hit like those end of college, like 21, and it's like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? Yet we're seeing, as you're talking about it, there is a reason for being single. There are things to do that are equally important to being to being married, right? So then how does the church end up? Because it seems, I've heard you teach on this many times, so it's not like this is a scripture that's really hidden that you need, it's not like there's some other scriptures I feel like sometimes you need some work to really understand what it's saying. This one seems pretty plain in 1 Corinthians 7.
Right.
So how does that happen within church culture? Because I think that's an important thing for us to address.
Yeah, well, I don't know how we got here. I just don't know how we got to that stage. I just know that here we are because, obviously marriage is important. Marriage has, it's very, very important. And I think people in the church do it not with malice, obviously, but with maybe a curious sense of goodness in their heart.
I think it's one of those things where it's like well intended but poorly executed.
There you go. That's putting it, the way it should be. Yeah, they have good intentions, but the passage that you're referring to in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 29 on to 37, 38, it's a really important passage in which Paul addresses being single and being married. All right, and so it's really important to understand that passage. And you said very often people don't really speak on that passage. It is a difficult passage, and sometimes difficult passages are difficult, and some people just say, well, I'm not going to deal with a difficult passage, right? I prefer to deal with an easier passage. But let's look at what does Paul says. He affirms singleness because what he says is that it is a gift. He calls it a gift, and he himself says that this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they have none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoice not, and they that buy as though they possess not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. All right, and he says, but I would have you without carefulness. And here's the point that he's making, right? I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. All right. Now, does it mean that married people don't care about the things of the Lord? No, he's not saying that. But what he's saying is that when a person is not married, Paul's teaching is that he wants them to use their time and their focus on the Lord and the ministry. Now, that is something that I think we miss. And you guys are single, so you tell me, do you think people miss that and get caught up in other things during their time that, because Paul is saying when you get married, you got to focus on your wife, you got to focus on your husband, you got to, children come and, you got to focus on this, then you got to pay bills and you got to, it takes away the focus, all right? So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I think that there can be a lot of pressure to focus on the marriage aspect and finding a partner and stuff like that. And in those times, that focus does get shifted. It's hard to focus on like building a relationship with God when everyone's telling you like, hey, when are you going to get married? Hey, you're getting older. Hey, are you dating anyone? So I think that with the outside pressures, it can sometimes be hard to focus on building the kingdom and building your relationship. But it's also important, I think, to quiet the noise so that you can build those certain things. Because you also need to know who you are in God before you can find a relationship and build something with someone else. Like, I can't build with someone else if I don't have a foundation for myself.
And there it is, all right? And that's an important point because it leads to the point of preparation for marriage, all right? And single people need to use the time that they're in to prepare for marriage.
So, and that was, so what Ariel was saying, one of the questions I had then is, as we said, the question of, hey, when you're getting married, it's, well-intended, poorly executed. Should there be a better effort, and I'm not saying our church specific, but because I think this is kind of a church culture thing that we've seen in a lot of churches, right? In which there is a focus on not just like your fundamentals of your faith, but what is it that single people should actually be focused on as it pertains to I'm single and I want to get married, right? Because then to what Paul is saying, right? I think for a lot of people, there's a disconnect between serving the Lord and preparation for marriage, right? I think we treat it as two separate things when I think it should be the same thing, right? Serving the Lord and prepping for marriage, it should go hand in hand. But when we treat marriage as sort of this, as you said, this kind of like first class, special class citizenship, we unintentionally separate it, I think, sometimes from God. It's like a detour, and then you kind of come back to God with the marriage. And I think we do a lot of people an injustice because, you know, like I've traveled with you and I've heard you talk about, like, you know, almost the entire series you have on family. And I think we're doing it backwards from the way you do it, because you start on marriage and work back to singleness. We're going the other way around. But I was exposed to, okay, here's what's happening. You don't hear that a lot in church, whether it's because the scripture is hard or, you know, whatever the case may be. I've also done our men's network class. You know, like I've done a lot of things in which I've been exposed to, okay, in that time of singleness, this is what you should be doing, and it goes hand in hand with one another. How do we kind of bridge that gap? Because I think there's a lot of people who are single who don't know what they should be doing.
Right. Well, I think a couple of things. One, obviously, you know, the church needs to do a better job at it. That's number one. The church must do a better job at it, and we must not see single people as less of a person than a married person. Right? Mm-hmm. We should not be seeing anybody and treating them as though they have the plague or they got some kind of you know, why they don't get married. Something must be wrong with them, you know. So we have to understand that. I think for a single person, and I'm a married person also, but you're asking about the you know, what do we do during this period of singleness, and how do we prepare for marriage, you know, and that the two are not separate or different. I think one of the most fundamental thing is that single or married person, Christ must be formed in your life. All right? And if Christ is not formed in your life, then you are setting yourself up for trouble. You're setting yourself up for failure. And so I think that is the most fundamental thing, all right? And it's the reason why young people fail. It is why I think people are unhappy. And I think they go into marriage also with if Christ is not formed in your life, you're going to go into marriage with Christ not formed in your life. So how are you going to be successful is the issue, you know? And I think that's a major part of singleness that needs to be focused on, all right? Let me put it this way. I know you need to focus on, you know, finding a marriage partner and all those things. But I think the first priority should be the formation of Christ in my life.
I think something that I've told a lot of people that ask me when I'm going to get married, one thing I tell them is that it's in God's timing, right? So as much as you may want me to get married now, I know that I am intentionally doing the things that I know that are going to build me to the place where I need to be at that point when I am ready for marriage or when that person does come into my life. Because I think, like you were saying, a lot of times people are looking for these partners or they're searching for marriage, but they don't have that foundation. And so you enter into this relationship and enter into this lifelong commitment with a cracked foundation. And then if you try to build on that, and if you try to add weight to it, it's going to crumble eventually.
Yep. No, that's exactly true. It's exactly true. So you have to use singleness, and here's the thing. A lot of people look to marriage to fill a void in their lives, because people think that if I reach a certain age and I'm not happy, it's because I'm single.
Because I'm single, yeah.
All right? So all my problems are related to me being single. So therefore, my solution is get married. So if I get married, all my problems will be over. All right? But is that true?
I don't think so. Because you're adding a whole different personality into mix with the problems that you already have to deal with.
So what I'm saying is that Christ must fill the void in your life.
Yeah.
Because if Christ doesn't fill the void in your life, then you are an unhappy person. You get married, and what's going to happen?
You're bringing it with you.
You're
It's still going to be there. Yeah.
Right? Because what's going to happen, typically what happens the first couple of months of the marriage, you have the euphoria of the newness of wedding and the honeymoon and all that stuff. But then after that, what happens? The void is still there.
Yeah.
It was never filled. And so if the void was never filled, then at some point in time, that void comes up. And here is how it typically manifests itself, in that the person or both persons, sometimes it's both persons, and that's a double whammy, because if you have two unhappy people getting married, I mean, it is trouble, right? It is trouble. But the way it manifests itself is that one day someone wakes up and they say that, I'm not happy with you. You are not making me happy. And that's when everything begins to crumble, because this person is unhappy and they're looking that this person here that they got married to is supposed to make them happy. All right? And now this person is not making them happy. So what do?
Run away. No. Well, at that point, if you're already married, I feel like you have to kind of work through it. You have to figure it out.
But you see the problem that it builds up, all right? And I think that happens to a lot of people. That happens to a lot of young people, all right? That instead of putting the pressure on yourself to find the right person, put that pressure on yourself to develop a love relationship with Jesus Christ, rather than seeking, to find a relationship with someone when you're not ready for it.
I think a lot of people focus on finding the right person more so than they focus on being the right person.
Yep, there you go.
And I think that's where that disconnect kind of comes in, because you expect this person to pick up where you fall short, but you don't even know where you fall short because you haven't taken that time to figure that part out.
Well, to that, I think there's also this very I'll say non-biblical idea of, a marriage is like this 50-50 thing, right? And I think that, to what you're saying, I think when you have that mentality, even as a single person, right, it puts you in a bad place. It sets you up for failure, because you're thinking, okay, it's okay that I haven't filled this void yet. This person will fill it. Right. And when they are incapable of doing that, because you've kind of bet on them doing that, when they don't meet that expectation, it creates these issues now within the marriage.
Right.
And I think that's where, like you were saying, right, that's where a lot of people, and even to, we'll talk about this next episode, but even to dating, I think that's where people get into a lot of issues just with dating, right? Just in the relationship, because they are hoping that I'm not happy, but this person will make me happy. And when that person can't do that or is no longer able to do that, it's okay, well, now I have to find someone else that will make me happy.
Right. Well, the blame goes on the person, right? You're not making me happy. So, I mean, both of you are young. Let me ask you the question, why is it that during this period that it is so challenging for single people to fill the void of their life with Christ and have that void fully filled into Christ and to have Christ formed in their lives?
I think it can be a few. I wasn't sure if you were going to talk first.
Go ahead.
I think it can be a few different reasons. I think if you're not surrounded by the right group or the right network, it's easy to find yourself focusing on other things, right? Because if I don't have Christ-centered people around me that can show me that, like, hey, this is like not like the pathway to go, but once you have this foundation and once you have this built, then you can kind of see where God takes you. But if you don't have those people around me showing that example, then it's easy to look outward, right? And to find validation in other people or seek for that person that I think is going to fill in where I don't.
Right. Well, does that mean that a lot of young people, or not say a lot, that many single people have a superficial relationship with the Lord?
I think most people do. I think a lot of people. There's I think it's a Casting Crowns song that talks about. I think it's called "Between the Altar and the Door," right? That disconnect of you come to the altar, you have this great moment with Christ, and by the time you hit the door to the church, it's gone.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
And I think for a lot of people, what ends up happening is, Eric brought up, who do you surround yourself with, right? It's easy within the four walls of the church to do something for Christ. When you leave the four walls of the church and you're no longer now surrounded by those same people, and you go back to your everyday life to, quote unquote, your everyday life, and maybe you are no longer surrounded by a bunch of believers. You're surrounded by non-believers, and now these non-believers might be your close friends, your family, the people you care about, the people you go through life with on a daily basis, and their priorities are different.
right.
And now that subtly influences you, because I can see, and I have seen this where, if you look at a lot of, like, I remember a lot of, is it middle school? No, probably high school. All of a sudden, a ton of people were just in relationships, and a few of us were like, "Did we miss the memo? Like, what just happened?" Because I went to elementary school, middle school with the same people, so we're in high school. I'm like, what changed all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, everyone's in a relationship, and that's all everyone can talk about. And now you go, well, okay, now I'm the odd one out because I'm not dating someone, I'm not in a relationship, even though, well, one girl, they actually got married from high school freshman, but like everyone else, like those relationships, I don't even think they talk to those people anymore, right? So to what Ariel was saying, I think sometimes it's just, as a single person, what are you surrounding yourself with, right? Because if you're surrounding yourself with friends who are constantly dating, and that becomes like the ideal, and I think sometimes dating is more so the ideal than marriage, which is a separate conversation, but no one wants to be the odd one out.
Right.
I think, so what I've noticed, like, as I've come into adulthood and, like, just the way things are societally, there is a lot of pressure to make sure that you as an individual can stand alone. And whether that's in terms of establishing your career or securing, like, a home or something like that for yourself, and to make sure that you are a standalone individual, that can kind of take precedence in a lot of people's lives. Because say I don't like find a partner, right? I need to make sure that I can do everything on my own. And so a lot of times, like you were saying, once you hit the door, like the relationship, the encounter that you had with God is still great and it's still like important. But once I hit that street, like my priorities have shifted back to like the quote unquote real world and like the realities of living in society, especially in New York where everything is, it's like expensive to breathe.
Yeah.
Like you can't do anything without it costing like minimum $20.
Yep.
So a lot of the people that I know that like are in my peer groups have focused or shifted their focus onto establishing themselves. And it's also like some of my friends were like in grad programs and stuff and they're doing research and they found that like, well, I don't think it was very hard to find this, but a lot of people nowadays are getting married less, or they're getting married later. And that, I think a lot of that has to do with where society is at now, with having to make sure that you can establish yourself prior to getting into relations.
All right.
Yeah, and to the last point, people getting married later, I think when I was in college, yeah, I had to do, because I went to a Catholic university, I had to do a class that was called Christian Marriage and Counseling, right? In which the
And
professor,
counseling?
in which the professor was a licensed marriage counselor. He took I think it's like a handbook that they would give a couple that's in premarital counseling, and he just went through the entire book with the class. And one of the things he started with talking about was the fact that basically 50% of marriages end in divorce. And that's been something that you hear a lot of when people talk about marriage, right? And now to me, I've seen the culture shift from you got to get married to you have to have something for yourself, because then if you get married and the marriage goes away, you now have something for yourself. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? But I think
I wouldn't go into a marriage anticipating that it would end.
and I think that's kind of the problem that I think a lot of people have also.
And that's where our Christianity comes in. That's where our faith and our belief in God. And that's why, I use the word Christ formation, that Christ be formed in you. I'm not saying to be involved in the church and to do this, even though those things are important. What I'm saying is Christ formation. All right, there is a difference, right? When I say that Christ be formed in you, because when Christ is formed in us, then a lot of things change in our life. A lot of things change in our life when Christ is formed in us. And so many people go into marriage with a plan B. All right, that if this doesn't work, well, I got a plan B. All right. But for a Christian, marriage is a covenant. A marriage is a covenant. And as a covenant, it is meant to last. And it is meant to last forever. And I know that's a whole different conversation that we can have, because in today's society, people go into marriage. You're correct. People go into marriage with a plan. Some may sign a prenup. I think there's a move right now where some people are saying, you know what, we should have marriage and we should sign an agreement that lasts for 5 years. And then
Like a temporary.
Yeah, and there are people who are moving who are saying, you know what, we should sign a 5-year deal. And then when the 5 years are up, we review it and we say, do we want to renew this agreement, or we don't want to we don't want to renew it, and we move on to another agreement. Well, that's where society is going. But also that's a sign of the end times, right? There's a sign of the end times that people will not want to get married, all right? And so we have to understand that as a Christian, I don't go into marriage thinking that this marriage is going to fail. I go into this marriage knowing that I will be successful, all right? And I think that's the mindset of a Christian who has Christ formed in them, all right? But then, you know, there are people who, as you said, they're scared. And that's why some young people don't get married. I mean, they're just scared.
I think part of the being scared I feel like there are a few different facets to being scared, because there's one where it's like, I'm scared because if I get close to this person, then they're going to see everything, right? All my faults and whatever. I think there's also the aspect of, what if it doesn't work, right? I've invested all this time and energy and effort into this, and like, what if it doesn't?
Right.
But that's also going back to like, I wouldn't enter a marriage anticipating that it would end, I think. And then I think there's also the being scared of just like the unknowns, like the what ifs, like, because you can never fully anticipate anything, I would say. And this is coming from someone that likes to anticipate everything. You can never know every option or everything that's going to happen.
And that's looking for perfection, all right? Can you find perfection? You know, because that's another reason people don't get married, because a female is constantly looking for Mr. Right, all right? She's looking for a guy that has all the money and is able to take care of her. And then the guy is looking for the girl that has, you know, the perfect body and so on. So, and a lot of people are going through life looking for the perfect person, not the right person, but the perfect person. So they never get married because they never find the perfect person.
I think the way dating culture is now, everyone is constant, because like everyone's on the apps, or no one really meets organically anymore, which is insane to me. Because like, I'll go out with my friends and we're at dinner, or like we're walking somewhere. No one will ever approach anyone anymore. So there's no way, it's very rare to meet someone in the wild. But I'll talk to my friends and they're all on these apps, and I'm like, oh, that guy looks nice, right? His profile or whatever is decent. And they're like, yeah, but there's like this thing. Or like, so one of the things I joke with my friends is that I wear a lot of heels. So I don't know if I can date someone that's shorter than like maybe 5'9" or 5'10", because I don't want to be taller than him in my heels. So we joke about that a lot. And so one of my friends is 5'10". So one time I wore my heels and I stood next to her and I was like, okay, this is how I know that if someone is lying about their height. But like we'll go through their apps, and it's like, there's so many options. It's hard to settle and to pick one, because you never know if the person that you're going to swipe next is better. And so I think a lot of people are caught up in looking for that next, that they're not really looking at what's right in front of them.
Well, and I don't know if intentional or unintentional, you said when you're swiping, you're settling, right?
Oh.
And I think that's kind of people's fear, right?
Yeah.
When like the thing I've noticed with now that we've fully the age of dating apps is just regular, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember, like, you know, I watch like a ton of like cop TV shows and things like that. I remember when dating apps came out and they started making episodes like, you don't talk to strangers on the internet, right? Like there were episodes, like Disney had episodes about this for like kid shows. The cop shows have it. Like every cop show, once a dating app's involved, someone gets like kidnapped or something, right? Now, that's so, not the kidnapping part, but the using a dating app and just meeting someone, and you really don't know if they are who they.
The kidnapping part is still very.
I don't want to go down that route right now with the conversation, but
there are many precautions women take.
I think to some degree, because we're in a digital age, dating apps have turned meeting people into a game, right?
Yep.
And in doing so, no one wants to lose.
Yeah.
No one wants to settle, right? So you're always constantly, well, who else is there, right? Because like one of the interesting words that has, or like slang or whatever, that has come out of dating apps is people having a roster. Because when you meet people organically,
Do you know what it means to have a roster?
I was going to get to that, but you go ahead and explain it. Go ahead, because I was also going to use the word ick, and I realized he may not know what that is either. Go ahead, explain what a roster
so
is.
to have a roster is like, you know, in sports when you have a roster of like the players,
Right.
it's basically the same concept where a person will have a list of people that they're currently speaking to all at the same time. And
Wow.
so you'll basically cycle through them, or like one day I'm talking to this person, one day I'm talking to this person. You can go on dates with all of them changeably, but this is your current roster that you were working on until you rule every one of them out, or one of them beats the rest of them, or whatever the case may be.
Like I said, we've turned dating into a game.
Yeah.
Right? Like one of the interesting things I've seen is I was watching something that was like a psychiatrist or psychologist, I really don't know which one it was, but they were talking about dating apps, and they said they shouldn't be called dating apps, they should be called intro apps, where you're making an introduction, because that changes the way people approach it, right? But again, if dating becomes a game, and every dating app that's out there, which is really just there to make money, realistically, the people who make the apps, they're trying to make money at the expense of how many people can you go on a date with, right? Because if you leave the app, they lose, right? Even the ones that talk about, oh, we want you to delete our app. No, they don't. That's just a tagline, right?
Because you deleted it and then you re-download it again.
Yeah, right. They want you to be
That
on
is
the
the
app.
pattern.
And I think, or I guess the question to you then, Dad, would be, as believers, I don't think there's something inherently wrong with using a dating app to meet someone, but how do we as believers approach marriage when the step before marriage for most people is dating has now become, it's not as serious as when I was in high school. It's not as serious as when you were growing up. Right. Dating and meeting people has become sort of this Russian roulette game.
I will interject before you go. I don't think there's a problem with dating on the apps. I think it goes back to your intention and the way that you do it. Mm-hmm. Because I know people that have married someone that they've met on the apps, and they're like, I've known Christian people that have that are solid and have their foundation and have married someone from the app because they went about it a certain way where their intentions were upfront and everything was like kosher, I guess. Like everyone was on the same level and looking for the same things.
All right. Well, I'll tell you a story. I have a friend of mine. He's older, in my age. And a few years ago, he called me and he said, "You know what? I've been on this app, and so I went to eventually meet the person, and he said that he stood across the street where he told the person to meet him. They never met before, and when he saw the person, he jumped on the subway and ran right back home. And so the person is still waiting for him over there.
My biggest fears.
But it comes back to fear, all right? It comes back to fear. But it's interesting with the roster that people have this big roster, and so that comes back to a fundamental issue that. Are you confident in yourself? And are you confident of who you are as a person in the Lord Jesus Christ? And are you willing to risk your life to arbitrarily, scrolling through a list of people, all right? Or does God intend for you to find someone that is of substance, someone that is going to help you, all right, fulfill the calling of God in your life, all right? And, when you look at the scriptures, the greatest example of marriage and courtship in the Bible is Isaac. All right? When you think of it and you think of what Abraham did, you would think that that's kind of quaint, it doesn't happen in our world. I know it doesn't happen in our world today. But when you examine it, there are some remarkable principles that are in that story. And the first thing that Abraham said, okay, Isaac, it's time for you to get married, all right? But Abraham was focused that Isaac needed to get married because Isaac needed to carry on the family line and fulfill God's mandate for Abraham. But he said something, he called his servant Eliezer, and he tasked Eliezer with this thing of going to find a bride. But here's what he said to Eliezer. He said, Eliezer, I don't want my son to marry any of the Canaanite women. I want my son to marry someone of my type, someone who, and he was not talking about race or ethnicity. What he was saying, someone that can understand the godly heritage that is in my son and follow my son. All right? Follow the God of my son and the God of Abraham. And that was significant, right? Because Abraham tasked Eliezer, and the starting point was, okay, we need to establish this, that she must be a godly woman. Now, I don't know, when people establish their roster, is that question number one? Is this person a godly person? And you look at Eliezer, when Eliezer got there, all right, and what Eliezer prayed, and that's important, right? What did Eliezer do? Eliezer got on the journey, and Eliezer prayed a prayer, and he says, Lord, grant me favor in this journey, and help me that I would find, right, a wife for my master. And he put a challenge out. He says, listen, I want to know that this woman is going to be the right woman. And he put a challenge out to God, and he says, listen, the one that feeds the camel is going to be the one, all right? And so what he was pointing out there, I'm looking for a godly woman, but I'm also looking for a woman who is enterprising, a woman who is hardworking, a woman who is going to stand by Isaac and understand what industry is, what business is, because she was going to come into the business family. Abraham was the wealthiest man around, but Eliezer was not looking for somebody who was just going to come and enjoy the wealth, but somebody who was going to contribute, right? And so you continue to see the principles of what Abraham was doing with Eliezer, all right, to find a wife for Isaac. But it was always based on this principle of godliness first. And I think that's where a lot of Christian singles are missing it, because some people become so desperate that they settle for anything that comes along their way, as long as it breathes and it moves and it talks. Yeah. All right, they settle. They settle, and I think when people settle like that, they are just losing a lot, and their lives are going to be miserable when they settle.
I think that comes with the pressures of society and those around you telling you that, hey, if you don't get married, you're missing out. But then even if you do get married and you settle, you're still missing out because you're not getting the full benefits of what a marriage would be.
Exactly. And so you're not entering into what God has for you. All right. And I think this is so important for any single person to be focused on what God has for me. And and I do believe that God will lead you to the right person.
Amen.
Yeah, so we're gonna stop here because talking about Isaac will run
It'll
into our
segue
next
into,
topic
yeah.
of dating and some questions that we have there. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in next week to hear the.
Let us know who's on your roster.
Please don't. It's a public page. People are gonna get mad.
Or what is your criteria for building a roster?
People calling out names and stuff. All right. Before she says anything else, we'll see you guys next week.